How you guys doing? Here we are, History 1530, the last part of Chapter 2. So this would be Friday's component. I'm getting to you a little bit late. Had some difficulties uploading. Uploading just stopped and stalled, and I should have uploaded. So here we go. New York Times helping us to keep the present and the past connected. So final stretch, Biden defends the lead against Trump's onslaught. Very important to keep up with the news, folks, especially as we approach this pivotal election in November. Get educated, get registered, and vote. Okay? By educated, look, talk to people who know people who are going to be impacted by the election. Make sure you're looking at credible sources. Right? In this case, we're looking really at primary sources, right? Material from the time in which we live, eyewitness accounts. As historians must, we need to judge the sources. Are they believable? Are they credible? Are they fact-based? Are they objective, right? So often when we get our news from Facebook or friends, things our associates like on Facebook, it's not valid, okay? There's a whole office building in Petersburg, Russia, filled with operatives putting stuff on Facebook and other social media to try to get you to vote in a certain way. Why? Because this is what nations do to one another, okay? And we've probably done stuff, certainly we have done stuff historically, to interfere with other nations' leadership in elections, okay? So be smart, right? As good students, as good historians, as good citizens must, right? Weigh the sources, evaluate them based upon objective fact. Also try to look at a variety of, again, credible, believable, trustworthy sources as you make your decisions, okay? By the way, when we vote, it's not just the presidency. It's up for grabs. It's 1/3 of the U.S. Senate. It's all of the House of Representatives, 435 members. Well, you only live in one district, right? So you only get to vote for one representative to the House, depending on where you live. It's never a perfect match, okay? This is not like some type of Match.com system, okay? You find the candidate whose values best express yours. Okay? That's how it works. All right, that's necessary in a democracy. An educated electorate is vital to democracy. That's why we're here, basically, okay? Or at least I'm here and you're wherever you are, right? To attain an education, right? To become better citizens, we can better live in the present and plan for the future. Your immediate future, okay? Here we go, History 1530. A couple of announcements have gone out. New test. Blackboard calls it a test. I call it a quiz. What's the difference? Well, for us, a quiz is worth 1/10 of an exam. Okay, test sounds really scary. Quiz is just from the reading. I shouldn't say just from the reading. There are 20 questions to complete in 20 minutes, and yes, you may refer to your textbook. However, if you've not read the chapter, you're not going to find the answers in 20 minutes. I don't care how fast you can Google. You can have the whole office building in Petersburg full of Russian trolls helping you. You're not going to get it done in any competent way in 20 minutes, okay? Unless you've read the book and become your own browser. If you know the answer from reading, good for you. Good reading comprehension. Often we have to kind of look it up, but at least we know where to look, okay? This is a quiz from Chapter 1, some older stuff up there. So I will have a discussion board. I didn't put it up yet. I kind of need to get through this lecture to know what I'm going to ask for a discussion board for this lecture. That's how we do attendance for the 1/3 of our course when we don't meet, okay? Obviously, we're meeting, it's a little confusing this semester, right? But we're meeting on Mondays and Wednesdays for 15 minutes each. This is the Friday session, although you can watch it whenever you want. Just make sure you do it before we have our first exam, which is when? Like the week of September 8th, okay? That's in your syllabus. Don't have time to pull that up right now. Because my clock is ticking here. Slideshow. Let's boot it up. We are about halfway through Chapter 2. We've talked about the previously we talked about the settlement of the Americas by Siberian peoples, right? 20,000 years ago. We didn't really mention the Vikings coming across the North Atlantic 1,000 years ago, did we? But we did, of course, get into depth with the Portuguese going around Africa, landing on the African coast, the Spanish, with Columbus, okay. Yes, my dog is going to make a star appearance. Hello, Ani. Welcome to History 1530. What would these asynchronous Zoom or YouTube sessions be without a professor's pet appearance. Maybe my cat next time. I don't know. Sorry about that. It's a little levity there. Spanish across the Atlantic following Columbus in 1492, right? The other European powers who had an Atlantic access are a bit delayed, right? Portugal and Spain are first, and then we have, I should say Spain and Portugal are first. Then we have the other nations, England, France, the Netherlands, a bit later to the so-called, it's not quite colonization, they're after trade. Okay? So previously we spoke about the French, okay, La Nouvelle France, where many of you might be watching this video, okay? That's where I am right now, and what formerly was La Nouvelle France, right? Céloron de Blainville, okay, French officer, came right through where I'm standing, probably in 1749, right? So this land was once claimed by the French. What were they after? Mainly trade, right? Pays d'Anhot, the upland, as it was called, was an area of compromise. French were far from France, right? The native people were facing disease. They didn't have a great centralized power. The French and the native people, for the most part, had to accommodate one another, right? Now, of course, and sadly, disease is spreading among native people, right? But the French mainly want fur. They want to trade. Look, they want to save Native American souls, and in the French definition, that meant converting them to Catholicism. Some native people might have converted, others did not. It tended to be a time of mutual compromise in the 1600s, late 1600s, early 1700s. That's going to change. The French government will be evicted from North America following the 7 Years' War, what you may know as the French and Indian War. Okay? And then the natives will have to make compromise with the English, who are not as accommodating, but more so than the Americans will be after 1781. So, before we get to that, we talked about the French. Make sure you review that in your textbook. New Netherland or Netherlands. Okay? Also, the Dutch want to trade. The Netherlands was a small country, only somewhat recently independent from Spain. If you look at the map, you're wondering, how did that happen? The Netherlands is up here, Spain is down here. Well, that's part of the independence drive, okay? The Dutch had also gone Protestant. Catholic remained very devoutly. Spain remained very devoutly Catholic, okay? And the Dutch were able to break free. Right? Dutch company, okay, establishes trade in the Americas. We have the Dutch West India Company, WIC, West India Company. The East India Company was going into what is now Indonesia, okay, even southern India and South Africa, eventually. Okay. So the Dutch actually spend less effort and less money and less time in North America. But it's a company, right? The empire is established by a private company. By this time, or soon to be, the Dutch were actually governed by groups of wealthy merchants called regents. They want to make even more money. So settlers in New Amsterdam, Long Island, what's now New York City, were salaried, and they were there to make profit for the company. They were employees of the company. That said, the Dutch, I'm going to say a lot of bad things about the Dutch, like giving guns to the Haudenosaunee or the Mohawks so they could take hunting land, beaver territory from other tribes. Pushes native people into the beaver wars, as they were called, right, over hunting and trapping territory. The Dutch will bring the first enslaved Africans to North America. So a lot of bad things about the Dutch. But one good thing I can say, I guess, at least for Europeans, they were religiously tolerant. Okay? The Dutch had moved in the direction of Calvinism. The Dutch Reformed Church was Calvinist, but really the Dutch were more interested in making money. So if you kept religion to yourself, didn't matter if you were Catholic, didn't matter if you were Jewish, which it did in most of the rest of Europe, Christian Europe anyway. It didn't matter if you were another denomination of Protestantism. Just kind of keep it yourself and let's make money. Okay? So they tended to be fairly secular, fairly tolerant. And they would allow some degree of self-government for the settlers in eastern New York. Okay? So here we go. They did import, that's an awful word, but I'm not sure what else we can use, enslaved Africans to raise agriculture. Sugar colonies were being established, as we know, in Brazil and in the Caribbean. Some of the Caribbean islands were claimed by the Dutch. Brazil was claimed by Portugal. All right. So the company often in an effort to gain settlers. How do we get people to go across the Atlantic and live under these harsh conditions? Let's give them some religious toleration, make it more attractive for them to emigrate. The Dutch church also supported religious tolerance and actually accepted converts to Calvinism among peoples of African and Native American origin. However, in a very unchristian way, they subscribed to the evolving racism of the era, the European racism toward people of different skin tone, which made it easy to justify profit. Okay? How do you justify degrading? Eventually, moving from servants, for 7 years to lifelong enslaved people who are bought and sold and mistreated, perhaps even worked to death. Children will be enslaved for profit. Well, racism is the construct. The Netherlands looked to trade with native people. Okay? They did upset the balance between tribes, especially by introducing guns. Okay? They were based in what is now, again, Manhattan Island or New Amsterdam. We moved up the Hudson River to Fort Orange, which we'll call Albany, and we'll engage in trade, beaver pelt trade. And you're like, I thought the French were doing it. Yes, the French and the Dutch will sometimes be in conflict with one another, violent conflict with one another. Other times they will have their Native American allies engage in kind of proxy battle. Okay? So the French were the Algonquin-speaking people, especially the Huron, against the Mohawk, okay? Supported by the Dutch. You can read about the economy. So much wampum or seashells used as money, flooded into actually this region here, even western New York, to pay for beaver pelts, that the price went up, okay? The shells became less valuable. So the Dutch are going to trade guns to the Mohawk with unfortunate results. It will strengthen the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois, okay, but it will lead to these beaver wars as power balance collapse among northeastern tribes. The Iroquois are going to move into Huron hunting territory, push the Hurons west toward, well, what we will now call Lake Huron. The French will ally with the Algonquin people. So conflict between the French and the Dutch will now be cut and pasted into the Americas, which will lead to conflict between the Algonquin Indians and Haudenosaunee or Iroquois. As the Dutch, we'll see, the Dutch will lose their power and eventually their colony to the English. The English will then begin to side with Haudenosaunee or again, Iroquois. Iroquois, from what I've been told, right, from students actually, associates who are of Native American ancestry, Iroquois, not the term they generally call themselves. Iroquois, I've been told, I still need to verify this, means ugly eel-eating people, not what you'd like to be termed. Okay? Haudenosaunee, the people. Okay? We are the people, Haudenosaunee. At this time made up of 5 tribes. Okay? So the Mohawk in the east, the Onondaga, the Oneida, the Seneca, Cayuga, sorry, they're in the middle. Not the Tuscarora until later. They were actually mistreated Iroquoian tribe from the Carolinas who fled northward due to English atrocities in the Carolinas and found shelter within the 5 nations of the Haudenosaunee, which then makes 6 nations, okay? So still today. So we're talking about actually this region. Really great monograph, a history book on this called The Middle Ground by Richard White. Excellent if any history majors out there want to do some good extra reading, maybe over semester break. Yes, our book really doesn't get into, yet, at least anyway, the collapse of New Netherlands. Look, it was a poorly funded outpost of the Netherlands, which had more interest in the Pacific, South Pacific, Indonesia. What they would call Java, so coffee and spices of Indonesia. And actually, as I mentioned, soon to be South Africa and parts of India. So the Dutch will lose their colony in the Americas, although not the Caribbean islands yet, but the colonies of the mainland North America to the English under the Duke of York, and what was New Amsterdam becomes known as New York. England will attempt an empire. Okay? Protestant England competing with Spain. Just going to check my time here so I don't speak to an empty camera. Okay, folks, still 4.5 minutes. 4.5 minutes in this segment. All right. It's tough when my dog actually can't do that. So, England, Protestant nation competing with Catholic Spain. Also really militant Protestantism, okay? Especially with the Puritans. And the more radical Puritans called the Pilgrims. Okay? Although Anglicanism was the official religion. The goal was to weaken Spain. England was actually a fairly poor, weak country. Spain was powerful, right? Spain was claiming much of the Americas by this time, had silver and even gold flowing in from there. And the English would raid Spanish ships, okay? Rather than establish a beachhead colonies in the Americas, it was cheaper and maybe smarter in some ways to attack the Spanish ships. So we're talking about pirating, okay? When you get an official license from your government to be a pirate, we call you a privateer for some private ships, okay? Attacking the Spanish as they head back across the Atlantic, laden with silver and gold and other wealth of the New World. Okay? Francis Drake was a pirate who was given the title Sir, made a nobleman by Queen Elizabeth I. Right? It's going to take England a while to actually engage in colonial ventures, to actually establish colonies and take territory instead of just taking Spanish ships. When they are established, they're done so by corporations or joint stock companies. Okay. The rehearsal for England's empire is seen in Eire, right, or Ireland. Ireland under Queen Elizabeth and her successors, and even to some extent under Cromwell prior to Elizabeth. I just made that in the mirror there. Okay, Cromwell is yet to come. Sorry. Elizabeth and Cromwell. Elizabeth and then James and then Charles and then Cromwell, then Charles and James. Okay, there's my Stuart dynasty. Except for Cromwell was a dictator. Ireland will be under siege. Okay, the English are conquering Ireland. The Irish were seen as barbaric because they were Catholic. They were somewhat of a poor nation. Okay, no potatoes yet. I don't mean that type of poverty, but they were subdued by the English. They believed the Irish were barbarian, and this would justify, in the English eyes, terrorism. So pushing women and children into basically barns made of straw and hay and setting them on fire. Okay, so the awful things the English did to the Irish will be then transmitted or cut and pasted to the Americas in their dealings with native people who were not Christian, and in Protestant English eyes, the Catholics were somehow seen as not Christian either. So Eire, or Ireland, became a model for colonial slaughter. All right, I'm going to pause here for a commercial break and come right back.